So what is it in us when this fear, fight or flight thing triggers? What's the root of this as it relates to the fear of death? When the fight or flight triggers in us and it's related to the fear of death, I think it distills down to this: the fear of uncertainty. So what's the fear of uncertainty? The fear of uncertainty, first of all, uncertainty is guaranteed. And so what I always tell people is, we cannot get rid of uncertainty. So don't even try to get rid of uncertainty. But we can get rid of the fear associated with it. That's the problem. That's the problem child. It's not uncertainty itself. I mean, you don't know if they're going to have your favorite apples at the store when you go there, for sure. You know, there's always uncertainty in life. But how can we eliminate the fear part? That's the key. And so I talk about expanding outside the supermarket aisle mind. So again, think about this, we who are spiritually more abstractly oriented folks. There's a tendency to disparage what I call the supermarket aisle mind. What's a supermarket aisle mind? The supermarket aisle mind is the focusing part of the mind. It's the part of our mind that makes decisions. It's not bad. It's part of our mind. We want that focusing part of our mind when we're driving through an intersection, right? We don't want to be spaced out when driving through an intersection, we get in a car accident. What I call the supermarket aisle mind, meaning you're walking down the supermarket aisle. Do I need broccoli? Do I need, do I need apples? Do I need bread? We're making decisions. That part of our mind is an integral part of our mind. But the key distinction is that it's not all of our mind, and those of you who've had any level of experience with meditation, NDEs, anything in this abstract realm, know what I'm talking about. But in terms of the fear of death, I always tell people, yeah, you don't know exactly how you're going to die, when you're going to die. There is that uncertainty. But and I tell them that you're going to know when you know. And so and how are we all going to know? We're all going to know when we know. Even people who have had NDEs, who've had incontrovertible, genuine experiences on what they perceive to be the other side, have not physically died yet by definition. They're back here, right? And so we will, each of us, know at that, what I call that most intimate moment of our lives, which is our physical death, exactly what's going to happen. That's when we're going to know, whether we've had an NDE or not. All right? But back to this idea of the vastness of our mind. One of my students, so anybody here from Houston? So the Houston Astrodome is closed, right? But one of my students got his PhD from the University of Houston in psychology in the 60s. And the Houston Astrodome was somewhere built, I Googled it once, Wikipedia, I think it was completed in 1965, something like that. And back then, for those of you who don't know this, or maybe too young to remember, the Houston Astrodome was the first enclosed air-conditioned coliseum in the world. It was a big deal. And in Houston, those of you know, it's a little bit hot and humid there, right? A friend of mine lived there, and he says, you stick a stick in the ground, and it'll just grow. So, but that was a big deal. And so the professor used this as an analogy, and I borrowed it and expanded on it since my student told me this. And the professor in psychology said, most people incorrectly think their mind is like this little 8-inch plastic bucket with like a few ping pong balls bouncing in and out of it. That's their thoughts. He said, no. You imagine that little 8-inch plastic bucket in the 50-yard line in the Houston Astrodome, and you're the only person in there, and it's empty. And it's dark. And there's a little desk lamp over the little 8-inch plastic bucket. That's what most people think their mind is. No. He said, and he said, no, the mind is much bigger than that. That was the end of the class, that part of the class. I've expanded on it. I said, no, you can meditate, you can turn within, you can find some technique that turns within that gets you in touch with these other aspects of yourself. What's that going to do? It's going to expand your mind outside the 8-inch plastic bucket into the vastness of the mind, which is the rest of this Astrodome. Now, we know that's a physical structure. So the mind, I don't think, is a physical structure. It's bigger than that, but it gives you an image. It gives you something more concrete to kind of have in your mind, so that you're not just in this abstract world completely. Okay? Expanding our conscious capacity for experience. That's another way of saying what I'm talking about. Think about those words. Expanding our conscious capacity for experience. Conscious. That means you're aware during, before, during, and after. You're consciously aware throughout the experience. Roger Ebert, those of you who know Roger Ebert, the movie critic, he had do you know he had an NDE? Based on his wife's firsthand account of what he said. So basically, I think what happened was, I was reading about this, and I guess Roger Ebert, she went to get him at the hospital, so forth, and he was being discharged. It's one of these classic situations that you hear from time to time, where the doctors think, oh, that's great, you'll get discharged, you're fine, go home. And they were discharging him, and he was sitting up in bed, in the hospital bed. His wife was there to get him, take him home, and so forth. And he sat up, and she said he looked like Buddha, and he just kind of closed his eyes. And she thought he was meditating. He died. So they realized he died, just like that. So, but before he died, he said this. He said, quote, "This is all an illusion," unquote. And he described heaven as, this is in her words, and he described heaven as, quote, "a vastness you can't even imagine." So this is a great example of what I'm talking about, namely that as we become more familiar with the vastness of our mind, as I was saying, the vastness of our mind, Houston Astrodome type thing, we expand our conscious capacity for experience through meditation. We reduce our stress and our strain and our anxiety and our fatigue in our physical body by turning on what I call the opposite of the fight or flight switch, which is what I say the meditation technique can do. Turn on the opposite of the fight or flight switch. How many people here are medical folks, medical backgrounds? So you know what the parasympathetic nervous system is. So I just call the turning on the parasympathetic, I call it turn on the opposite of the fight or flight, because everybody knows what the fight or flight is, right? Not everybody knows what the parasympathetic is. But that's essentially, that's the same thing. We turn that on, we allow the mind to expand its conscious capacity for experience outside the 8-inch plastic bucket. That's what I think did not happen with Roger Ebert. That's why I think he genuinely thought, this is all an illusion. There's this vastness you can't even imagine. I could never imagine this vastness. Now, I'm not saying when you die it's not you don't feel some vastness. But what I am suggesting is that through meditation, if one regularly is meditating, and when I say regularly, I'm talking about every day. I'm not talking about once every couple of weeks or once a week or once every few days. I'm talking about exposing the mind-body emotional system to this different style of functioning that we're calling meditation on a regular basis. That opens up vistas that are very, very different. That opens up vistas that are more in alignment, you could say, analogous to, for those of you who have had NDEs, to those experiences that you had. Those experiences that you had as an NDE become less unfamiliar, if that makes sense. So when I read this Roger Ebert experience, I thought, wow, it's not as shocking when you have had that familiarity with the experience. Okay? So again, I'm just going to introduce this idea briefly, this conscious of XYZ idea. A friend of mine, Charlie, we taught meditation together in the 1970s. He's a philosophy professor at university now. And no surprise, he came up with this phrase, but it's a very succinct phrase to kind of describe a lot of things. And conscious of XYZ. XYZ are the identifiable experiences, things, objects, and so forth in life. So there are so on a more subtle level, your thoughts and emotions and so forth are still identifiable, all right? And on a more concrete level, it's like, my watch and, tablecloth and the car you drive and the kids and all that. Those are very concrete, more concrete on an energetic, physical level. XYZs of life. The key thing is, his point was that the XYZs of life are always changing. And not only that, but most people identify themselves with the XYZs. If their car gets a scratch on them, they totally lose it. That's them. And we know people like this, right? We maybe have family members like this. So people who are very close to us, in other words. But those are always changing. Now, is that really who we are? No. His point was that, what about the left side, the consciousness side, the mind side, the experiencer? You have the experiencer on the left side, and you get experience on the right side. Okay? So again, I know I'm sort of preaching to the choir here on that point, but I just want to introduce you to the concept, because you can borrow and use this when you're talking to other people. And it's about the expansion and connection between the two. It's not that the XYZs are bad. This is not a black and white. This is not a good-bad thing. This is about integration, okay, between the two. Spiritual materialism. I'll tell you a funny story. So this is kind of another phrase that I came up with a couple of years ago. As long as we keep the transcendent and the material, the XYZ being the material and the transcendent being the consciousness side, separate from each other and not integrated with each other, then we're kind of stuck in spiritual materialism in a sense. And just as self-disclosure, I'll tell you 12 words that one of my spiritual teachers said to me. She was actually Lillian Rosen, I'll mention her name. She's long since passed away. She was probably about, 65, 70 years old back in 1973 when I knew her. And I was a newly minted TM meditation teacher. I'd been maybe a teacher. I think I was a teacher for 2-3 weeks, and I was helping Lillian. And bottom line is that I sat with her once, had a break. I was helping her. I was like her personal assistant, because she was seeing so many people. She was the I think the third TM teacher ever made by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in the world. Eventually there were 15,000 teachers. She was like the third, number 3 or something like that. So everybody's like, oh, Lillian's coming to town. Wow, she's been meditating for 10 years. That's amazing. I've been meditating for 3 years. And so I came up to her and I said, Lillian, I had this experience. I closed my eyes. I feel so expansive. I'm lit up inside. It's like floodlight. I feel so at peace. And it's like my heart rate, it's like I can't even feel it. It's like shut off. She said these 12 words to me. She said, Kelvin, I think you may be liking that a little too much. What was Lillian telling me? Now, I learned, more from those 12 words than anything. It was just, and I've been using this with my students ever since, because it's not about how great the experience is. That's spiritual materialism, is what I call spiritual materialism. There's still a separation. We need to have the integration of the experience into our consciousness so that we are 100% comfortable with it and we become familiar with that. And that's where I think the rubber meets the road when we're talking about STEs and NDEs. Because I don't know each of your personal experiences, but I've heard plenty of discussion in Bruce's and others today. People have had experiences that are shocking to them. They are left with an inability to cope with the experience, whether it's an STE or an NDE. That's a problem, right? Because we still need to go forward with living our lives. I was hearing stories in the Experiences Lounge today, earlier as well, along these lines. So it's about integration of this so that we expand our conscious capacity for experience. Now, just several key points. I'm going to get into the details of these more in my talk tomorrow, but I just thought I'd hit on these. The experience of time is different. You've heard this. Some of you have experienced this. The experience of time is different. Not just on the other side, but when you're meditating and really letting go, How many people have experienced that in meditation? Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about, right? So that experience of time is different. It's not so much as people use the phrase timeless. It felt timeless. What does that mean? They're using it more poetically, more metaphorically, meaning they don't mean it literally, because it's not timeless. It's just difficult to judge time because it was so weird from my normal way I'm having experience of time right now, for example. But that's what they mean by timeless, because what's time? Time is a measurement of change. Well, there's still change going on there. They still have an identity because there's still an I involved. Otherwise, they could say they wouldn't remember the experience, right? So there's the experience of time is different. Experience of one's mind is of light, more abstract. Self-confidence increases. That's what dissipates the fear of uncertainty. The fear of uncertainty is the inner confidence that comes about. That's why uncertainty becomes then a non-issue. So it all comes about because of what? Integration of mind, body, and spirit. That's what it's all about, right? You've heard this before. That's not news to you. But here's the thing, is that generally speaking, there's a missing component in most people's daily life. Now, I say regular meditation. I really do mean, whether you're doing mine or some other technique, it doesn't matter. You should be doing it regularly, because we get so out of balance so easily, getting caught up in this, that, and the other thing, and we reprioritize to all that other stuff, the XYZs, the contact with the XYZs, the conscious of XYZ model, the contact with the XYZs far outweighs most people's lives, far outweighs their contact with the consciousness side, the time they spend connecting with themselves, right? That's all I'm saying. It's the invisible glue, the missing component. It's the necessary daily tool. It's the A to B. It's how you get from A to B. That's what that little graphic is. How do you get from point A to point B? Lots of people can describe to you point B. Oh, you should be at peace. You should be feeling a oneness, a connectedness, and so forth, this love and acceptance and everything. But that's point B. How do you get from where you are if you're frustrated or you're tired or you're whatever? That's the thing. So that the gap of care, or in the gap in general, gap of life, I think my experience has been that meditation is critically important. And just a few key points just on how, on the technique that I teach, as you heard Bob say, effortless, easy and effortless, no focusing, no clearing the mind, turning on the opposite of the fight or flight, as we said, expanding outside the 8-inch plastic bucket. So again, bottom line, the end result is this. Greater enjoyment, greater clarity of mind, more inner stability, more openness of heart. There are many helpers and givers in the IANDS community. I submit to you that we as helpers cannot truly be as effective and profound in the effect of our work if we are not helping ourselves first, if we are not taking care of ourselves first. I draw a distinction between selfish and self-interest. Self-interest, we are all self-interested. They are not synonymous. You become too self-interested, then you become selfish. But self-interest is important. If you're not taking care of yourself, who's going to take care of you? So we need, as helpers, to help ourselves first. And that's how the openness of our heart, we can flow freely and give freely, more freely and more effectively to others. So again, by meditating and reducing our stress, expanding our conscious mind's capacity for experience, when we have an NDE, an STE, or when we physically die, the familiarity of our mind will make those transitions easy, natural, not strange or mystical, but normal. Thank you very much. I'd like to open up for questions. Anybody have questions? Any questions? Microphones over here. If anybody has any questions they want to ask. I think I don't know if you can see my social media stuff on the bottom there, but at the bookstore there's a sheet there as well. While if anybody wants to work their way to the microphone or ask a question, feel free. But I thought I'd share this with you also. This is one of my clients, and I just spoke with him. So he reached out to me after having 4 NDEs. 4. And he told me, and this was in January. I just talked to him 3 days ago on the phone. He was originally from Mexico when I taught him, and then he moved to Germany, and now he's in Spain. But 4 NDEs. And he came to me because he was not the category of NDEs, let's say, that you mostly hear about where people feel so great afterwards and it's changed their lives in such a positive way, et cetera, et cetera. He was the opposite, okay? And there's not a lot of talk about that, so I wanted to talk about this. Because it's reality, and Bruce mentioned it this morning, and he said he only had an hour to talk or whatever. You know, this happens, right? So what do you do about it? So he had 4 NDEs. The last one, he was on fire from the feet up in an RV, caught fire while he's driving in Mexico. So he had 3rd-degree burns and so forth. With all that pain, the doctors put him into a medically induced coma for 7 weeks. And then he told me 7 weeks after he got out of his coma, he called me. He found me on the internet, Googled me. Anyway, you can't read that on the screen. So let me just, he said, the book Overcoming the Fear of Death by Kelvin and his meditation technique helped me in a way I never thought was possible. So simple yet profound. They've helped me accept the reality as a human being, as difficult as it may be. I never thought something so undemanding would help me, as painful as it may have been and so difficult at times going through my having had these 4 NDEs. I'm finding the faith to accept one day at a time, living in the present. Fritz Mueller is his name. But the idea, again, this is an example of what I'm talking about his fear of death and dying. He had a fear of death, and then he also had a fear of living afterwards. So he had fear of living, continuing, because, after 4 NDEs. And he told me the other day, when I talked to him 3 days ago, he's not even sure if it was 4. He knows it was definitely 4, but there may have been several others, and he wasn't sure if he could categorize them as an NDE. But whatever. The key was integration. The meditation helped him integrate himself internally, and now he's feeling like he can integrate himself in the world again. And he's got a young son, et cetera, et cetera. He has people who rely on him for their love and support. So thought I'd share that example with you as a real life one, and also of one with somebody who did not have an NDE that left him feeling really comfortable. Okay? Questions? Anything else? Anything else? Well, I'm going to teach you something real quick. Those of you who actually paid attention and saw there's actually, on the thing, it's like, Kel's going to teach you a technique. So I'm not going to teach you the technique that I teach because it's a 4-day thing and so forth, and you can read about it on the brochure and on my website, so forth, kelvinchin.org. That's how you can find me. But I'm going to teach you a couple of techniques right now. And you can take this, you can teach this to other people. And you go back to your workplace, wherever, and it's very simple. So one technique is, I just call it, put your hand on your tummy. And I have had clients, you can do it on the outside, or I had a client tell me, she told me, the PTSD client I told you about, who drilling holes in her in the middle of surgery. She said, I like putting my hand skin on skin. I said, okay, whatever works, it's fine. But I have lawyers doing this in partnership meetings as well. Yeah, nobody knows what they're doing. So the beauty of this, you just put your hand in your tummy, and I'll explain to you how it works. You just put your hand in your tummy, and then you just take 6 or 8, 10 deep breaths. It's very simple. It's so simple. And I have like hundreds of people doing this around the world, and just 8 or 10 deep breaths. I taught my son this 30 years ago, or not 30 years ago, 27 years ago when he went to kindergarten. And I said, just put your hand in your tummy, take 6, a bunch of deep breaths. Nobody will know what you're doing because you're just sitting there at your desk and think about how much Daddy loves you. And it just was magic. And my daughter, who's younger, same thing. I teach moms to teach it, or moms and dads to teach it to their kids. I have a kid stage fright, and I taught him. His mom called me, put me on the phone as they were driving to the final performance of the theater camp, and the kid's freaked out, and he's crying. He's crying on the phone. They're driving to the final performance. Like all the kids, the parents, everybody's gonna show up, blah blah blah, hundreds of people, and I taught him this, and I said, do it in your car, on the way, and when you're standing on stage before you go on, just do it. Nobody will know what you're doing. Totally under the radar. Nobody knows. You can do it standing, sitting, eyes open, eyes closed. Doesn't matter. He did it. He was good to go. Yeah. Another story. I got a call. I got a text from a friend because I'm available to like 24/7 pretty much for my clients, 7 days a week. And I got one at around 11 o'clock my time. I'm in LA, and so he was a couple hours ahead of me, wherever time zone. And so it was like 1 in the morning. So I said, Josh, what's up? He sent me a text. He says, oh man, I'm having a panic attack. And I said, okay, just call me. So I called him. I taught him this, and I taught him alternate nostril breathing. You know alternate nostril breathing? You close off one nostril, you exhale, you close off that other nostril, you exhale. These are the 2 techniques I'm teaching you now. Exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale. Okay? I taught him that. And I tell people it's a nose exercise. Don't do hyperventilation. And you can't do it if you have a stuffy nose. So I had him doing this, right? So I had him doing this till like 1:30 in the morning his time. So half an hour on the phone with him. The next day he texts me and he says, I didn't tell you where I was the night before. I was in my car. I figured I'd text you, see what was up, if you were up, if you were still awake. I was sitting in my car outside in the parking lot outside the emergency room of the hospital in my town. I was just ready to go and check in because he was in a panic attack. He said, I felt so relaxed after we did that, I just went home and I slept like a baby. So it's very simple stuff. So it's temporary, it's immediate but temporary. It's not so long-lasting, permanent like a meditation technique would be. But there you go. Okay? Good. See ya.